Welcome to the creative community. I'm your host, David Starkey, and my guests this time are Susan Bearwald and Deirdre Gary. Susan is the co-owner, and Deirdre is the general manager of Just Folk American Art Gallery. We're going to take a long look inside this just really fascinating place, and we're outside right now because there's just a terrific building that you're housing your gallery in. I'd love to hear, first of all, how you got started, Susan, and then tell me a little bit about the space.
Well, I got started in folk art by collecting quilts. That was my first American folk art passion. And I went from there to fabric, to furniture, to dolls, to everything. And when I decided when I grew up, I wanted to really get into actually having a gallery or a shop. We're never sure if it's a shop or a gallery. We call it a little bit of both. And my friend Marcy Carsey and I both adored American folk art, and we said, oh, this sounds like a wonderful idea.
Well, Deirdre, how did you get involved with Susan?
Well, I have a background in art and design, and when I saw this fabulous building go up, I circled it and pursued them until they had no choice but to take me on.
Now, tell us about...
She came very highly recommended.
I'm sure she did. Tell me about this space, because you put a lot of thought into the place that's going to house your collection.
We did. You know, we originally looked in Los Angeles to see, because Marcy and I both live in Los Angeles and our families are there, and we looked at different venues in Los Angeles and places, and we decided that things were either overdeveloped or underdeveloped where they were. And Marcy has a house in Montecito, and we said, ooh, why don't we think about going up towards there to have this gallery? And looked at this piece of property which had a house on it and said, this looks really good. And it's sort of where I wanted to spend my later years, shall we say. So it seemed perfect. And we contacted a local architect named Brian Kernal, who is totally wonderful, and worked with him and said, we want a barn on the first floor, we want a gallery on the second floor, and a little New England cottage in the back. And that's what we got.
Well, we're here in beautiful Summerland. Let's go take a look inside Just Folk. So we're inside now, Susan. This is a kind of a family room type environment. This is when you first walk into Just Folk. Tell us about what we're seeing here.
Well, what you're seeing is what we call our living room, and we wanted people to see how folk art works in all sorts of settings, which is why we created the living room with the fireplace. We had the stone built and everything, and the chairs done, and couches, and we have a library here, so that if people want to find out about different artists, outsider artists, folk artists, or just American folk art in general, they can consult our library. We have a fire going here all winter, and it's very cozy, and we want people to feel comfortable enough to come in and sit down and learn about the art or just enjoy it.
Well, you have a lot of very high-end pieces here, and yet it's so friendly. Deirdre, some people were coming in. We're in after hours. You were so kind to them. And as I was here earlier today, I noticed that it's a place you don't feel like this is a stuffy New York gallery where the owners are going to look down their nose at you. It's very, very welcoming.
Oh, absolutely. The owners watch every sunset and tap dance. So, and we hate to turn people away. It's really set up as an educational experience. So it's always difficult to say, sorry, we're closed, which we don't like to do, but in this case, we thought we'd make the exception.
We appreciate that. Now, there's an interesting piece behind us that you wanted to show us, Susan.
Okay, this is a totem pole that I found in a gallery in Chicago, a wonderful guy named Scott Filer with Mad Parade. And the interesting thing about this totem pole is that it is two-sided. So you get to see both expressions on both sides And I think it's a very unique piece. One guy appears to be watching the street, and another is watching over there. So we figure it's all eyes on everyone.
So there's a big shelf here now, and we see lots of carved figures. They look almost like toys. It looks like something from Howard Finster, I'm not sure. And then some dollhouses that I know that my daughter would love. Tell us what you see here.
This is an eclectic mix of things. There's some outsider art. The tin piece is by David Butler, who is an African-American artist. The sculptures, you were right on Howard Finster. This is by Elijah Pierce, who is a very famous African-American sculptor. He was a barber or sculptor or preacher, depending upon the day, I would imagine. And the houses, originally when we opened, we had houses in almost every one of these slots, and we've sold quite a few of them. But we felt that I love collections of things. I love things that are alike. We'll get to a few things that I've put together in different places, like the gloves over there. But here, we keep changing and mixing to see what's around and what looks good together, what are funny combinations of things. And we make sure to do as complete an explanation of everything as we possibly can so people know what they're looking at. For instance, this is a rooster done by Leroy Archuleta, who is a Southwest carver. And his father, Felipe Archuleta, also did carving. He happened to have done the sketch of the rooster. So it's a sort of father-son combination there.
You know, outsider artists and folk artists are people, as you say, are untrained. They're outside the mainstream of the art world, and yet they're commanding some pretty high prices for their pieces. It's an interesting kind of cross-section between the wealthy and the underprivileged in a way. Talk a little bit about that tension, and also that there's a lot of excitement, I think, where those two areas come together.
There's a lot of controversy and there's a lot of excitement, because soon I think there will be no distinction between outsider art and modern art, or art of the 20th century or art of the 21st century. But because this is the first time that we've been open to everything and everybody is exposed to everything via the internet, I think there will be very few people who are so isolated that they will be outside the mainstream. However, there will always be artists with developmental disabilities, artists who are incarcerated or who are in mental hospitals, people who live in remote places who create art just from themselves. And I think there'll always be that distinction. Now, the controversy is, are we taking advantage of some of the artists by charging market prices for them? And I think that's a question you always have to ask. Why is an Andy Warhol worth $20 million and, you know, the cereal box is not? I think that as artists become more recognized for what their output is, and it's unfortunately after they're dead in many cases, but artists like Finster, for instance, started producing so much stuff. I think Picasso probably did too. And the value of it becomes a little bit diminished by how much there is of it. An artist like Bill Traylor only worked for 4 years in his whole lifetime. So those pieces are very highly valued now. And it really is what the market can bear. But I'm always happy when artists or the artist families get to share in the success.